Something is shaping your thoughts right now. Not with a shout, not with force, not even with logic, but with language, with words you've heard so many times, in so many tones, from so many mouths, that they no longer sound like manipulation. They sound like reality, and that's exactly how it wins. That's exactly how it burrows into your mind, undetected, like a seed planted beneath the surface, quiet, patient, and poisonous. You think you're making decisions freely, you think your voice belongs to you, but pause, just for a moment, and ask yourself this. Why do you hesitate before you speak? Why do you shrink a little after you express your feelings? Why does your mind replay certain conversations long after they've ended? Not with clarity, but with confusion, shame, or guilt. This is not random. This is not emotional weakness. This is programming, manipulation, that doesn't arrive in the form of a villain. It arrives with care in its tone, concern in its words, and love in its disguise. And Carl Jung saw it long before most of us ever learned its name. He warned that we are not only influenced by others, but governed by the unconscious forces we refuse to confront. And one of the most powerful of those forces, language, especially when it's used against us. You've heard these phrases before, not shouted, but spoken softly, in a calm voice, a rational voice, a voice that made you question your own perception. You're overreacting. I'm just trying to help. If you really loved me. They sound like concern. They sound like love. But what they truly are is control. And here's the terrifying part. You believed them. Not because you're foolish, not because you're weak, but because no one ever told you how to spot a manipulator whose only weapon is conversation. No one taught you that the most dangerous people don't always raise their voices. They lower them. They speak gently. They plant doubt like a gardener plants flowers, in rows, with patience, and with a smile. So what happens? You stop trusting yourself. You internalize those words until they sound like your own thoughts. You say things like, I'm probably just too sensitive, or maybe I'm reading too much into it. You no longer need someone to gaslight you, because you're doing it to yourself. This is where it begins. This is the ground zero of manipulation, not with a scream, not with an insult, but with that small suffocating doubt that creeps in when someone you care about says, you're imagining things. And from that moment, your intuition starts to crumble, your instincts begin to feel unreliable, and you slowly begin to hand over the keys to your emotional safety. Not all at once, just a little at a time, a phrase here, a silence there, until one day, you're no longer sure where their voice ends and yours begins. And Carl Jung would tell you this is not just a psychological issue, it's spiritual. Because when someone rewrites the script of your reality, using words dressed as love, they don't just invade your mind, they steal something sacred, your inner compass. But you're not powerless. In fact, the moment you begin to notice these words, the spell starts to crack. This video is not about blaming others, it's about seeing clearly. It's about tearing off the mask that hides the hand beneath the kind gesture. It's about recognizing that not every I care about you is love, and not every I'm just being honest is truth. If you've ever walked away from a conversation feeling small, feeling confused, feeling like you needed to apologize, just for having feelings, you've already met a manipulator. Maybe they were your partner, maybe a parent, a friend, or maybe it was your own voice, repeating phrases someone else taught you. This video is a fracture in that illusion, a spotlight on the quiet war that happens every day, not outside of us, but inside. And over the next few minutes, I'm going to show you the 5 most common phrases that manipulators use. Phrases that seem ordinary, phrases that sound like love, but underneath are weapons. We won't scream, we won't moralize, we'll simply tell the truth. And when you learn to see the trap hidden inside these everyday words, something extraordinary will happen. You'll stop playing their game. You'll stop doubting your truth. You'll start taking your voice back. And that changes everything. They don't need to raise their voice to control you. They just need to speak at the right moment, with the right tone, and the right phrase. The one that bypasses your logic and goes straight to your core. It doesn't feel like an attack. It feels like correction. Like care, like someone helping you see reason. And that's exactly why it works. Most people imagine manipulation as something loud, aggressive, easy to detect, like someone yelling or forcing you into submission. But real manipulation, it's quieter, it's patient, it doesn't need chains or locks, it just needs you to second-guess yourself. And once you start doing that, the rest is easy. Have you ever found yourself apologizing for how you feel, not because you were wrong, but because someone else made you feel wrong for feeling it? That's not growth, that's not maturity, that's conditioning. Somewhere along the line, someone started teaching you that your emotions were too much, too intense, too inconvenient, and so you started shrinking, you started filtering, you started abandoning yourself. One apology at a time. Carl Jung said something chilling. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And manipulators do exactly that. Instead of confronting their inner chaos, they project it onto you. They take their shame, their guilt, their fear, and hand it to you like a beautifully wrapped gift. And when you open it, you think it was always yours. You've been taught to see doubt as humility, to see silence as strength. But when someone uses language to make you doubt your reality, your needs, your intuition, that's not humility, that's submission. And it doesn't come from respect, it comes from fear. Fear that if you speak, you'll be seen as difficult, that if you push back, you'll be abandoned, that if you say no, they'll take their love and leave. So you learn to adapt, to adjust, to rationalize the irrational. You tell yourself things like, they didn't mean it like that, or I probably took it the wrong way. You rewrite the narrative in their favor, even when every cell in your body is screaming that something is off. And this isn't just psychological damage, it's spiritual theft, because every time you erase yourself to keep someone else comfortable, you hand them a piece of your power, and they don't even have to ask for it. They just have to plant enough doubt. Think about how many times you've been in a conversation where you suddenly feel small, uncertain, like you've lost your footing. You can't quite explain it, but something about the way they spoke, the timing, the wording, the calm delivery, left you shaken. That's the trap. It's not what they said, it's how they made you feel afterward. You start walking on eggshells. You start replaying scenarios in your head, wondering if you really were too sensitive, too dramatic, too selfish. You start needing their approval just to feel sane again. And before you know it, you're not living your life, you're performing in theirs. Jung believed that manipulation thrives in the unconscious, that it's not always intentional. Sometimes, people don't know they're doing it. They were manipulated themselves. They're repeating what they learned. And that's what makes it even more dangerous, because they believe they're right. They believe they're loving you. And if you're not careful, you'll believe it too. But listen to me. You're not crazy. That discomfort you feel, that tightening in your chest when certain phrases are spoken, that is your intuition trying to speak, and it's time you listen. You're going to learn to identify the 5 phrases that manipulators use like weapons. But before we get there, you need to understand this. The manipulation doesn't start with the phrase itself. It starts with a moment, the exact second you begin to trust someone else's voice more than your own. It's when you feel something is off, but you talk yourself out of it. It's when you want to say that hurt me, but instead you say, it's fine. It's when someone says, you're being dramatic, and instead of defending yourself, you apologize. That's the moment they enter, not with force, not with cruelty, but with soft, quiet, surgical control. And if you're not conscious of it, you'll start to believe the problem is you, that you're too emotional, that you always ruin things, that your boundaries are burdens, that your voice doesn't deserve space. And that is the greatest lie of all, because the truth is, the people who truly love you never make you feel like your emotions are wrong. They don't punish you for your honesty. They don't confuse you into obedience. The people who manipulate you, they don't want resolution, they want control. And if they feel like they're losing that control, they'll use silence, guilt, affection, even flattery, to pull you back in. But now, you're waking up, you're starting to notice, you're beginning to remember who you were before they taught you to question your own feelings. And that awareness, that's the beginning of freedom. Stay with me, because in the next part, we're going to break open the first of the 5 phrases that manipulators use to keep you doubting yourself. And once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it again. Let me ask you something personal. Have you ever walked away from a conversation and felt like you lost a piece of yourself in it? You didn't yell, you didn't fight, but something about the way it ended left you questioning everything. Not just what was said, but who you are. That's not conflict, that's not miscommunication, that's psychological erosion. Because the first thing manipulation does is silence your inner voice. It doesn't rip it out, it doesn't destroy it, it whispers over it, slowly, repeatedly, until you forget what your truth sounded like. Carl Jung warned us long ago that people don't see things as they are, they see things as they are. And when someone refuses to face their own shadow, their own fear, their own guilt, they look for someone else to carry it. And that someone is often you. And how do they transfer it? Through language, through questions that sound innocent, through phrases that seem harmless, through tone that feels calm, but cold. They don't call you broken, they just say, "Why are you always so emotional?" They don't say you're wrong, they just ask, "Don't you think you're overreacting?" They don't insult you, they suggest you're making this bigger than it is, and suddenly you go quiet, not because you've changed your mind, but because now, you're not sure if you're allowed to feel what you feel. And that moment right there, that internal hesitation, is the kill switch. That's when the manipulation sinks in, when the phrase you just heard starts repeating in your mind, not in their voice anymore, but in yours. That's the brilliance of psychological control. It doesn't need to shout to be effective, it just needs you to do its job for it. And if you've been hearing those phrases long enough, you start to rewrite your story. You turn trauma into misunderstanding, you paint abuse in the colors of love, you call control concern, and you call silence peace. You stop setting boundaries, because you don't want to be difficult. You stop speaking up, because you don't want to cause drama. You stop leaving because you're afraid of being selfish. But where in that equation are you? Where did your needs go? Your truth, your fire? Jung believed that we all carry within us a voice that knows what we need, a compass. But when someone uses language to distort your direction, that compass spins wildly, and if you rely on them to steady it, you'll always be lost. Now listen closely. When someone makes you feel like your emotions are too much, they're not trying to help you, they're trying to shrink you. Because when you're small, you're easier to control. When you're unsure, you're easier to mold. And when you're silent, they get to tell the story. And maybe that's exactly what's been happening. Maybe for years, someone's been narrating your life for you, defining your reactions, rewriting your boundaries, disguising their manipulation as love. And maybe now, you're starting to remember the moments that didn't feel right, the times you stayed quiet when everything inside you wanted to scream, the guilt that didn't belong to you, but still settled into your chest like a stone. That's not just memory, that's your truth resurfacing, and you don't need permission to claim it. Because when you begin to notice these patterns, when you start seeing the phrases for what they are, you're not just recognizing manipulation, you're reclaiming yourself. Every time you catch that thought, that self-doubt, that hesitation, and trace it back to the person who planted it, you take one step closer to emotional sovereignty. But this part is hard, because manipulation doesn't only come from others. After a while, it begins to echo inside you. You start using their phrases on yourself. You begin to doubt your joy. You mistrust your peace. You sabotage the very moments that could heal you, because discomfort has become familiar, and safety feels suspicious. And that's no accident. That's design. It's what happens when your nervous system adapts to chaos. You become addicted to tension. You equate love with anxiety, and when calm finally comes, you wait for it to explode. But you don't have to live like that anymore. The truth is, you've never been too much. You were just surrounded by people who made you feel that way to keep you manageable. You were never asking for too much. You were asking the wrong people. And now, it's time to start asking yourself. Ask yourself, do I trust the way I feel? Ask, what if I'm not overreacting? What if this is my body finally telling the truth? Because that moment, when you choose to believe yourself over their voice, is when healing begins. In the next part, we'll break down the first of the 5 phrases that reveals a manipulator. The one you've probably heard more times than you can count, but never truly seen for what it is. And once we name it, it loses power. It's just 2 words. Quiet, casual, almost logical. But when they hit like a slap you weren't ready for. You're overreacting. The first phrase, the most common, the most poisonous. They don't yell it, they don't scream, they deliver it with a sigh, with a tilted head, with that calm, composed tone that makes you feel like the unstable one. And suddenly, everything inside you, the heat in your chest, the ache in your gut, the tightness in your throat, gets invalidated in one breath, not because your reaction was loud, not because it was wrong, but because it made them uncomfortable. That phrase is a gaslight dressed as concern, a scalpel disguised as a blanket. It tells you that your emotional reality is inconvenient, that your instincts are unreliable, that your perception is distorted, and if you hear it enough times, you begin to believe it. Carl Jung said that nothing is more dangerous than a repressed emotion, and this phrase, this quiet dismissal, is how repression begins. It teaches you not to trust yourself, not to feel fully, not to speak up until you've triple-checked that it won't make anyone else squirm. Your overreacting doesn't just stop an argument, it stops your growth, it stops your healing, because it doesn't ask why you feel something, it declares that you shouldn't. And let me tell you something painful, but freeing. When someone uses this phrase often, they're not interested in understanding you. They're interested in controlling the emotional temperature of the room. And that usually means, you have to turn your fire down so they can feel comfortable. But emotions aren't inconvenient. They're data. They're messages from your body, your past, your boundaries, your values. When someone says you're overreacting, what they really mean is, your reaction doesn't serve me, and there's a difference. Your tears don't make you weak. Your anger doesn't make you crazy. Your boundaries don't make you selfish. These are signs that you're alive, aware, and trying to protect something sacred. Your peace, your dignity, your sense of self. But if you've been told over and over that your reaction is too much, you start to internalize that as identity. You become the dramatic one. The unstable one. The one who ruins moments. You stop expressing anything unless it's perfectly packaged, completely rational, and guaranteed not to upset anyone. And that is not peace. That's emotional imprisonment. Here's what makes this phrase so powerful for manipulators. It shifts the focus away from what was done to how you responded. It erases the offense and magnifies your reaction. You could be crying because they disrespected your trust. You could be raising your voice because you were deeply hurt. But once they say you're overreacting, the spotlight moves. Now you're the problem. Now you're on trial. It's a classic strategy. When they don't want to take accountability, they redefine your reality. And the more calmly they say it, the more chaotic you begin to feel. And here's the trap. You try to prove that you're not overreacting. You start defending your tone, your words, your reasons. But that's a game you can't win, because the moment you start defending how you feel, instead of why you feel it, the manipulator has already succeeded. They've redirected your energy away from their behavior and back toward your self-doubt. So what do? You pause, you breathe, you remember emotions are not threats, they're truth tellers. And the next time someone says you're overreacting, ask yourself, or am I finally reacting to something I've been taught to ignore? Ask, what are they trying to protect by dismissing how I feel? Because the truth is, your reaction might not be too much. It might be just enough to finally set a boundary, to call out the manipulation, to speak your truth louder than their disapproval. Carl Jung believed that the path to wholeness requires confronting your shadow, those parts of you that were denied, dismissed, or demonized. And if your emotions have always been treated like something to apologize for, then reclaiming them is not just healing, it's revolution. It's saying, no, I'm not I'm reacting exactly the way someone who's been hurt should react. It's saying, if my feelings are inconvenient, maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe it's the situation I'm being forced to tolerate. And the most powerful thing you can do is stop shrinking to fit someone else's threshold for comfort. Because the people who truly see you, the ones who love you honestly, they don't say, you're overreacting. They say, I see that you're in pain. Tell me more. They don't control the narrative. They hold space for it. You deserve that. And now that you've seen through the first phrase, the curtain has lifted just a little more. There are 4 more phrases ahead. 4 more weapons disguised as care, and in the next part we'll expose the second one. The one that pretends to love you, but really wants to own you. Stay with me. The unraveling has only just begun. At first glance it feels warm, protective, like someone standing between you and harm. I'm only saying this for your own good. You hear it and think, maybe they care, maybe they see something I don't, maybe I'm just too close to the situation to think clearly. But listen closer, not to the words, but to what they do to you. Because what follows that phrase almost never feels good. It stings, it shames, it silences, and yet it wears the mask of love. This is manipulation wrapped in concern. It's control disguised as care. It's not just what they say, it's the positioning. When someone says, I'm only saying this for your own good, they are elevating themselves and diminishing you. They place themselves in the role of the wiser, more rational guide. And you become the misguided child, the reckless emotional one who needs to be corrected, fixed or saved. And Carl Jung would tell you, that's a red flag of projection. Because often the person giving this advice isn't motivated by your well-being. They're motivated by fear. Their fear of losing you, fear of you outgrowing them, fear of being exposed for who they really are once you see clearly. So instead of saying, I'm afraid, they say I'm helping. Instead of admitting their insecurity, they frame your growth as danger. And because they phrase it kindly, you hesitate to resist. You don't want to seem ungrateful. You don't want to reject help, but deep down, your body knows the truth. Because real help doesn't come with guilt. Real love doesn't carry conditions. And true concern doesn't cut you open and call it healing. This phrase often comes at turning points in your life. When you're about to set a boundary, take a risk, make a change. That's when the manipulator steps in and says it. I'm only saying this for your own good. And what they're really saying is, don't do what you're about to do. Because if you do, I'll lose control. And that's the game. They insert their voice into your decisions. They hijack your clarity with their doubt. They plant seeds of fear where you were beginning to grow courage. And they do it in a way that makes you feel like resisting them is selfish, disrespectful, wrong. That's the genius of this phrase. It makes control feel like kindness. It makes self-abandonment feel like loyalty. Carl Jung spoke often of the persona, the mask we wear to fit in, to please others, to survive. And when someone uses this phrase, they are trying to enforce their version of who you should be. They're saying, I know you better than you know yourself. They're saying, let me define your limits. And the moment you accept that, you put on a mask that isn't yours. You lose touch with your intuition. You second-guess your instincts. You begin to consult other people's comfort before your own needs. And slowly, you forget what it felt like to trust your own voice. That's not guidance. That's quiet domination. And here's the hardest truth. Sometimes, the people who say this phrase the most are the ones closest to you. Parents, partners, friends, people who've loved you in their own broken ways. People who don't realize they're still reliving their own traumas through you. They may genuinely believe they're helping, but belief doesn't cancel impact. And you, if you're not careful, will confuse their anxiety with wisdom. You'll mistake their fear for foresight, and you'll build your future based on the ruins of someone else's past. But it's not your job to heal someone else's regrets by abandoning your dreams. You have a right to make choices they don't understand. You have a right to say no, even when they say it's love. You have a right to grow in a direction they never imagined for you. Because love, real love, doesn't say, I'm only saying this for your own good. It asks, what do you need? How can I support you? It doesn't impose, it listens. It doesn't guilt, it trusts. And if you find yourself in that moment, where you're about to make a decision, and someone tells you, I'm only saying this for your own good, pause. Look at what they're really afraid of. Is it your failure they fear? Or your independence? Is it your pain they're worried about? Or the fact that you're no longer reliant on them? Because that phrase is rarely about your good. It's about their comfort, their control, their version of you that they don't want to let go of. And once you see it, you can choose differently. You can smile, nod, and still walk away. You can thank them for the concern, and then live your life on your terms. Because you don't owe anyone your obedience in exchange for love. And if their love disappears the moment you stop obeying, it was never love, it was leverage. In the next part, we'll expose another common trap, a phrase that weaponizes affection and turns love into a negotiation. The kind that doesn't ask you to feel, it demands that you prove. And once again, you'll learn how to tear off the mask and take your truth back. There it is. One of the most dangerous phrases a manipulator can ever use. It doesn't scream. It doesn't accuse. It simply starts with 5 words that sound like intimacy, but are in fact emotional chains. If you really loved me. And just like that, love becomes a test. You were expressing a boundary. You were taking a breath for yourself. You were asking for space, time, understanding. But instead of being heard, you're handed a condition. Prove your love, not by how you feel, but by how well you obey. If you really loved me, you wouldn't say that. If you really loved me, you'd stay. If you really loved me, you'd understand. If you really loved me, you'd do this one thing I'm asking. It sounds like need. It sounds like longing. But beneath the surface, it's a tactic. It's not love speaking. It's fear wearing a romantic mask. Carl Jung once wrote that emotional blackmail stems from the unconscious need to control what we fear we'll lose. And when someone feels you pulling away, when they sense your autonomy waking up, they don't reach for your hand, they reach for your guilt. Because guilt, unlike love, can be enforced. This phrase is subtle warfare. It doesn't protect the relationship. It protects the manipulator's comfort. It keeps you tangled in emotional debt. It forces you to prove again and again that your love is real, but only on their terms. And the longer you stay in that pattern, the more your love starts to feel like performance. You begin to measure your worth in sacrifices. You start believing that loyalty means surrender, and that true love means saying yes, even when your whole body says no. But that's not love. That's a transaction. That's the collapse of consent. Because when someone says, if you really loved me, what they mean is bend, change, shrink, break, so I don't have to feel uncomfortable. And the moment you do, the moment you give in, they don't see it as love, they see it as victory. And here's what's even more heartbreaking. Once this phrase enters a relationship, it rarely leaves. It becomes the background music of every disagreement, the shadow behind every request. You start anticipating it before it's even said. You edit yourself before you speak. You say yes before you think. You endure what hurts just to avoid hearing it again. And then comes the worst part. You start using it on yourself. If I really loved them, I wouldn't be upset. If I really cared, I would stay. If I were a good partner, I'd let this go. You take their weapon and turn it inward. You carry their doubts like your own, and you begin to confuse pain with proof. The more it hurts, the more convinced you are that you're doing the right thing. But Carl Jung warned us about this too. He said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This phrase, if you really loved me, is one of the clearest signs that love has stopped being a connection and started being a contract, one with fine print you never agreed to. Real love doesn't need to be proven through self-betrayal. Real love doesn't ask you to diminish yourself to maintain it. Real love doesn't turn your boundaries into weapons. So what do you do when someone says it? You pause. You remember love is not a currency. You look at what they're asking. You ask yourself, if I didn't love them, would this still feel wrong? Because if the answer is yes, then love is not the problem, their demand is. And if they only feel loved when you're silent, compliant, exhausted, then what they need isn't your love, it's your submission. And you are not here to submit, you are here to love fully, yes, but without losing yourself in the process. So when you hear that phrase again, and you will, you don't need to fight, you don't need to explain, you don't need to defend. You simply remember, love that needs evidence through sacrifice is love built on insecurity, not intimacy. And you get to choose, to stay, to walk, to speak, to breathe, not because you're proving anything, but because love should never make you doubt your own heart. In the next part, we'll uncover the 4th phrase, one that's designed to erase your identity entirely. A phrase that doesn't argue with you, it defines you. And once you see it, You'll never let it rewrite you again. It's a sentence that arrives with finality, like a verdict that's already been decided. You always do this. Not "this hurt me," not "can we talk about what just happened," but a full identity statement. A box, a label, a scarlet letter, tied around your name. You always, followed by a flaw, a failure, a moment they never let you forget. And suddenly, it's not about the disagreement anymore. It's not about the issue. It's about you, all of you, your patterns, your personality, your past. Everything you are gets boiled down into one unchangeable truth. You always mess things up. You always make a scene. You always overreact. You always push people away. Carl Jung taught us that the psyche thrives on wholeness, on integration. But when someone repeats a phrase like this, they are doing the opposite. They are fragmenting you. They are reducing you to a role, a stereotype, something they can criticize without reflection. Because when they say, "you always do this," what they're really doing is dodging responsibility. Instead of acknowledging their part in the tension, they focus the spotlight entirely on your supposed pattern. It's clean, it's convenient, it's cruel, and here's the sinister part. It works. You pause, you replay past moments, searching for the evidence. You wonder if they're right. You ask yourself, do I really always do this? Have I been blind to this part of me? And without realizing it, you begin to perform damage control for something you may not have even done. That's how manipulation through generalization works. It turns a moment of conflict into a case against your character. It makes you defend your existence instead of your perspective. But pause, breathe, ask yourself, do I really always do anything? Because no human being is always anything. We grow, we change, we contradict ourselves. That's part of being alive. So when someone uses "always" against you, what they're saying isn't factual. It's strategic. It's meant to shut you down, to put you on the defensive, to win, not to connect. "You always do this" is not an observation. It's an accusation disguised as insight. And it carries the heavy implication that who you are is the problem, not just your actions, but your entire being. And what happens when you hear this phrase enough? You internalize it. It becomes your narrative. You begin to apologize before you speak. You avoid bringing things up, because you're always making things worse. You let things go, not because you've made peace, but because you've been convinced you're the one who needs to change. This is how manipulation rewires identity, one phrase at a time. And Jung warned us, when someone projects their own unresolved shadow onto you, they will twist everything to avoid confronting themselves. If they're the ones who fear abandonment, they'll accuse you of being needy. If they're the ones who cause chaos, they'll call you dramatic. And if they're unwilling to change, they'll say, "You always do this," because in their mind, it's easier to control you than to confront themselves. And maybe that's what you've been caught in. A loop where every disagreement becomes a history lesson, not one that's honest, one that's weaponized, where your past is used to invalidate your present. But here's the truth. They don't want you to realize, you're not static. You are not a fixed set of flaws. You are not a broken machine running the same code forever. You're a human being learning, adapting, trying. And yes, maybe you've made mistakes. Maybe you've overreacted. Maybe you've walked away when you should have stayed. But those were moments. They are not your essence. So the next time someone says, "You always do this," listen to your body. Do you feel small, tense, ashamed? That's the manipulation entering. And that is your signal. You don't have to fight. You don't have to explain. You just have to remember. That phrase is not truth. It's a tactic, a way to keep you stuck, a way to make the present argument feel like a losing battle before it even begins. Carl Jung believed, healing comes when we stop identifying with the persona others give us, and start listening to the parts we've buried. So when someone generalizes you, don't shrink. Don't accept their version of your story. Say instead, "I'm not here to live in a pattern you've created for me. I'm here to grow, even if it makes you uncomfortable." Because the people who truly love you don't define you by your worst days. They don't replay your past to win in the present. They see you trying, and they meet you there, with truth, with effort, with grace. In the next part, we'll uncover the fifth phrase, one that sounds like disappointment, but is really a punishment. It's the phrase they use when they feel they're losing control, and it's meant to hurt. But once we expose it, it loses its grip. It doesn't come during the fight, it comes after, when the shouting has stopped, when the silence begins to settle. That's when they drop it. Quiet, measured, piercing. I expected more from you. They don't raise their voice. They don't beg. They don't argue. They look disappointed, like you failed them in some unspeakable way. And suddenly, you're not angry anymore. You're guilty. Because this phrase isn't about what you did. It's about who you're supposed to be. It's not about a disagreement. It's a silent indictment of your worth. And it hurts, deeply. Because we all want to be enough for the people we love. We want to be seen as good, loyal, strong, kind. And when someone we care about says they're disappointed, it doesn't just sting. It unravels us. But here's the twist. This phrase, it's rarely about you. It's about control. Carl Jung taught us that disappointment is often projection, that people don't see us as we are. They see us as the reflection of their own unmet needs. And when you don't serve those needs, when you disrupt the narrative they built around who you should be, they punish you with withdrawal, with guilt. With this phrase, I expected more from you. It sounds moral. It sounds righteous, but underneath it's manipulation. Because it doesn't invite conversation. It shuts it down. It doesn't ask for understanding. It demands compliance. It doesn't say, let's talk. It says, you failed me, and now I will withhold love until you make it right. And you, if you're like most people, will scramble. You'll apologize. You'll try to make it better. You'll abandon your truth just to restore the connection. That's the power of this phrase. It makes you feel like the one who broke something, when all you really did was step out of their control. It happens when you set a boundary, when you say no, when you finally speak up about what hurts. They don't fight back with facts. They wound you with disappointment. Because if they can make you feel like you caused the rupture, they don't have to take responsibility for their behavior. They don't have to change. They just have to wait until you come back, guilt-ridden and obedient. And this is where the damage goes deeper. Because when you grow up hearing that phrase from parents, from partners, from teachers, it carves a wound. You start believing your value is conditional, that love must be earned through perfection, that mistakes make you unlovable. And so, even in adulthood, even when you know better, that phrase still works. It still hooks you. It still pulls you back into shame. But here's the truth that manipulative people don't want you to realize. Their expectations are not your obligation. You are not here to live up to someone else's script. You are not a character in their emotional theater. And if being true to yourself means disappointing someone who only loved you when you were compliant, then let them be disappointed. Because disappointment is not abuse. It's not betrayal. It's not wrong. It's a sign that you finally made a choice they couldn't control. And if their love fades because of that, then what you lost wasn't love. It was a performance. Carl Jung believed that we become whole not by pleasing everyone, but by becoming who we truly are, even when it breaks someone else's illusion. So when someone tells you, I expected more from you, don't collapse. Ask more of what? More silence, more sacrifice, more pretending. Or did they expect you to keep choosing them over yourself? That's not love. That's training. That's emotional domestication. And the only way to break it is to stop apologizing for disappointing those who never saw your full humanity in the first place. Because the people who truly love you, they might get hurt, they might get surprised, but they don't weaponize their expectations to keep you small. They don't abandon you for speaking your truth. They walk with you through discomfort. They grow with you. They listen. This phrase, I expected more from you, is meant to make you forget your progress, your voice, your right to choose. Don't let it. Because the moment you stop fearing their disappointment, you become unshakable. You realize that love doesn't have to come at the cost of self-betrayal. You understand that it's okay to let someone down if standing tall means finally lifting yourself up. In the next part, we'll unravel the hidden trap that comes after the manipulation, the part where they suddenly become kind again. Loving, gentle. It's not healing, it's strategy. And once you recognize it, you'll never mistake it for change again. You finally speak up. You finally say no. You finally begin to pull away. And for a moment there's silence, an unfamiliar quiet. You expect the argument, the guilt, the blame, but it doesn't come. Instead they soften. They reach out gently. Their tone changes. Their words sound sweeter. They tell you they've been thinking, that you matter, that they're sorry, sort of, that they didn't mean to hurt you, that they'll change. You feel a flicker of hope. Maybe this time it's different. Maybe all they needed was a wake-up call. Maybe now they finally see you. But pause, breathe, look closely, because this isn't healing. This is strategy. It's called the rescue phase, the final act of emotional manipulation. The moment they sense control slipping away, and they do whatever it takes to pull you back in. Carl Jung warned that the unconscious, when threatened, doesn't seek truth, it seeks safety. And when a manipulator feels you breaking free, they don't reflect, they react, not with change, with charm. They don't become someone new, they become the version of themselves you always wished they were. Attentive, apologetic, affectionate. They touch your wounds gently, but not to heal them, to reopen them, just wide enough, to step back in. And because you're human, because you care, you feel it. That ache, that longing, that familiar pull toward what once felt like love. But here's the truth they don't want you to remember. They are not loving you. They are losing control of you. And that kindness you're receiving, it's a leash disguised as a kiss. It's not an apology. It's a reset button. And they've done it before, haven't they? The pattern, the rupture, the guilt, the chase, the tenderness, and then slowly, the return to the old ways. Because the rescue phase isn't real change, it's emotional negotiation, and they know exactly how to play the part. They'll cry if they have to. They'll confess just enough to look sincere, but not enough to take responsibility. They'll make promises, not because they intend to keep them, but because they know you want to believe them. And here's the most painful part. It works because you do. Because you're tired. Because you're still healing. Because deep down you still want to believe that the person they pretended to be at the beginning was real. But Jung would remind you, what you repress becomes your master. And the more you repress your pain to protect their potential, the longer you'll stay stuck in a loop that never truly ends. This rescue phase isn't a rebirth. It's a rerun. And the only way out is to stop mistaking relief for respect. Because just because they're being nice now doesn't mean they've changed. It means they're afraid. Afraid of losing the power they held over your heart. And once they feel safe again, once you come back, once you lower your guard, they'll return to who they were. Because there was no transformation, only a temporary performance. And you'll begin to doubt yourself again. You'll wonder if you overreacted. You'll tell yourself, they're trying. You'll feel guilty for pulling away. But guilt is not a compass, and kindness is not always truth. Carl Jung said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And this sudden affection is that avoidance in action. A distraction, a detour, a desperate attempt to pull you back into the story, where they are the hero, and you are the one who always comes back. But you don't have to play that role anymore. You can break the script, you can hold the line. You can love someone, and still say no to who they refuse to become. You can see the tears and still walk away. Because real love doesn't ask you to betray your boundaries, to prove its worth. Real love is consistent. It grows, it reflects, it acts. It doesn't wait for your silence to feel secure. So when the rescue phase begins, when they suddenly become everything you ever wanted, watch not their words, but their patterns. Have they taken responsibility? Have they addressed the real harm? Have they changed behavior, or just tone? Because someone who truly loves you doesn't only show up when they're losing you, they show up consistently. And when you finally stop falling for the rescue, something powerful happens. You stop waiting for them to save you, and you realize you've been the rescue all along. In the next part, we'll talk about the echo that remains when the manipulator is gone. The phrases that continue to live inside you, even after the door is closed. Because the damage doesn't end with the relationship. It lingers until you break the loop. The door is closed. The calls have stopped. The apologies have faded. They're no longer in your life, but somehow, they still are. In the silence, in the mirror, in the way you speak to yourself when you make a mistake. Because here's the truth no one tells you. Manipulation doesn't always end when the manipulator leaves. It lingers. It echoes. It survives in the phrases they planted inside you. The ones you now say to yourself without even realizing it. I'm probably overreacting. I'm being too sensitive again. It's my fault. I ruin everything. I should have just stayed quiet. These aren't your thoughts. They're relics, leftovers, ghosts, and Carl Jung would call them the voice of the shadow, the unconscious patterns that take root when you've lived too long in someone else's narrative. You see, when someone manipulates you, they don't just alter your behavior, they infiltrate your self-perception. And if you don't catch it in time, you begin to carry their voice in your mind, like it's your own, like it belongs there. But it doesn't. It never did. And now, it's time to break the loop. Because if you don't, you'll become the very thing you were trying to escape. You'll become your own manipulator. You'll silence yourself before anyone else has to. You'll gaslight your emotions without anyone saying a word. You'll walk into new relationships already conditioned to shrink. And that's how the cycle repeats. Not just with lovers, it with friends, with family, with children. What isn't healed gets handed down. But here's the thing. You're here. You've seen the truth. You've named the phrases. You've recognized the patterns. And that means you've already taken the first step toward freedom. Now comes the hardest one. You must unlearn. You must unlearn the belief that love must hurt. That silence is safer than truth. That peace means keeping others happy while abandoning yourself. You must unlearn the guilt that was never yours to carry. And above all, you must unlearn their voice, so you can finally hear your own again. Because when you do, everything begins to shift. That lump in your throat when you speak your truth, it becomes your power rising. That pit in your stomach when someone crosses a boundary, it becomes your compass pointing you toward clarity. And that silence they once used against you, it becomes your sanctuary, a sacred space, not empty, but finally yours. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. But you're not calling this fate anymore. You're calling it what it is: manipulation, conditioning, survival patterns. And that means you can change it. Because clarity is irreversible. Once you see the strings, you can't pretend they're not there. Once you name the poison, it begins to lose its power. And once you reclaim your truth, you become unmanipulable. Not because you're hardened, but because you're whole. That's the difference. Manipulators thrive in confusion, in insecurity, in doubt. But you've turned your doubt into discernment. You've turned your silence into sovereignty. And maybe you're still healing. Maybe you still hear their voice. Sometimes. That's okay. Healing isn't about erasing the pain. It's about learning to respond to it differently. So when you hear that inner voice whispering, maybe you're overreacting, pause. Ask, whose voice is that? Is it mine? Or is it theirs? And then, choose yours. Every time, choose the voice that comforts, not condemns, that listens, not silences, that says I believe you, instead of, you're too much. Because when you finally choose your own voice, loudly, unapologetically, even if it trembles, you're not just healing, you're becoming whole. And that is what ends the cycle. Not revenge, not silence, not even walking away, but standing in the wreckage and saying this ends with me. Because love, real love, doesn't require the loss of yourself. Love sees you. Love holds space for your contradictions. Love lets you be soft and strong, messy and magnificent, all at once. And if it doesn't do that, it's not love. It's performance. It's control. It's emotional labor, with no return. Let it go. Let them go. And if you need something to hold on to this. You do not have to earn kindness. You do not have to prove your pain. You do not have to shrink to be safe. You are already enough, even in the unraveling, even in the becoming. And the most radical thing you can do now is to rebuild yourself in your own image, not theirs. To tell your story, your way. To look in the mirror and say, not I'm broken, But and survival, in a world that tried to silence you, is no small thing, it's everything.